the title of today, and sort of the catchy, snazzy, title and outcome that I see for all of you, and that I would love to hear back in maybe less than 6 months is how do we get a 6-figure ROI from a podcast? Because I know that I've talked to people who have been hundreds of episodes in and still wondering if their show is actually making any money. And so my let's call it a claim. My thesis for you is that even if you have no followers, no show, no audience, that you can still generate a significant ROI, or if you're even in a small niche. And my goal is to prove that to you over these next hour or so, and we'll get into some more stuff as well. Okay, so pop quiz, and if you guys are available to throw this in the chat, you can just there's 3 sort of questions here. And I'd love to just know your thoughts on them. So the first is, and you can put a true, just true, false, false, or false, 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 or true, whatever it is. The first one is the only way to make money from your podcast is through sponsors, and that you need a large audience to do that. That's a big idea that I talk to a lot of people, and they go, well, how do I get sponsors? And so if you think that that's the only way, put true for one. A lot of people think that they need a lot of downloads. This 1,000 downloads number is this sort of this number that is thrown around, and they think, well, once I get to this number, I will be able to monetize. And another idea out there that a lot of people have is that they need like fancy equipment, or they need a really nice camera, or a really nice microphone, or they need to go into studio or have a studio built out in order to be successful. And it looks like, let me pull the chat up here. Candy says false, false, false. True, true, false. And yeah, so I think we'll talk about these, and hopefully my intention is over these next hour or so to show you how you don't need a big audience, how you can monetize without sponsors from the get-go, how you can start monetizing right away, and also how you probably don't need, there might be a little bit of a camera that you need, but outside of most iPhones and most cell phones, that's really what you need. So let's keep going. Here's sort of when I was thinking about how do we do this, it really comes down to 3 things. I think there's 3 things that people can have in place. The first is what we call our profitable podcast foundation. And that is just making sure that you are setting up and going in the right direction. I have an analogy, if you will, a metaphor of like a podcast is like a train track, and you can get going, and you can be, like I said, hundreds of episodes into your show and have gone in the wrong direction, right? One of my mentors, famously told me that, like if I'm trying to get to I live in LA, which is where I grew up, and I'm trying to get to Vegas, I've got to chart a path there. And if I even veer off just a little bit, or if I'm not, focused in the right direction from the start, I could end up in Mexico, or I can end up in Washington, or wherever it is. And the point being is that if we don't know where we want to go, it's very easy to get going and look up and realize, how do we get here? What are we doing? And, how do we get back to where we're trying to go? The second thing that we'll talk about is what I call our pipeline builder playbook. And this is great for people who really have a thriving sales process, and a lot of the challenge is, it becomes like a lead problem for a lot of businesses. How do we get more leads? Well, once we get leads coming in the door, the next sort of challenge is like, how do we get the right people coming in the door? And I think a podcast can really help with getting the right people coming into the door. And so that's what we'll talk about, how to get started with that. And then the third is what I call our industry celebrity playbook, because after a while, people start to, they want other people to notice. Yes, do downloads matter? No, but they feel good, right? And it feels good for people to actually, watch and listen and resonate with them. So we'll talk about how to actually get people to notice, or really how to get the right people to notice. Okay, here we go. Let's over here. And I talk really fast, so if you need me to slow down, repeat something, you can definitely unmute yourself, let me know, throw it in the chat, and I'll try to go over whatever it is I can. Here's what I think about, right? I think about like so many people, so many business owners, they wake up and it's sort of like, it's like a rush of cortisol is what it feels like. It's like stress, and I don't know where it's coming from, and I don't know how things are happening. And a lot of it is built, at least for my early on when I was in business, like hope marketing. Like, I hope these things work. I hope something comes through. And what I really love is that when a podcast starts to get rolling, you can really have your ideal people coming to you. It's amazing. Just today I've had this is like my sixth call today, but it's incredible when your calendar is filled with people who are interested in what you do. They want to talk to you, and they come in already sort of pre-sold, because a lot of them have listened to your content, or they listened to your podcast, or they read something from the content. And so I think that that's sort of the thing that we're trying to get to. I started out before I got into the internet marketing and content space. I sold Cutco knives. It was like I not like quite door to door, but I would go in and I would try and get into as many wonderful houses that I can, right? It was all about like getting your foot in the door. And I think that what is so amazing about content and podcasts is that it's a great way to sort of get your foot in the door. And from what I know about you guys on the call, a lot of you guys have value and incredible expertise to share. And so if we can get your foot in the door with more ideal people, then that's just going to be good for business. And if we can do it in a structured way that actually ends up in sales calls and revenue and in purchases or whatever it is, then sort of all the better. Another thing that I think about is that really comes from having a strategically positioned podcast is speaking opportunities. A lot of times people will want to get on stages because they know that if they can get on a stage, or they can speak at a conference, or they can speak with a particular group or a mastermind or something like that, then you can really get a lot of leads all at once. And so how do we get those people to come to us, as I think really sort of the goal, as opposed to us trying to get trying to force our way into people. Wouldn't it be great if they sort of understood? The first case study if I can think about, or like, when my story, I've been working with podcasts for a little over a decade now. And one of the first shows that I had the fortune of working with was called Perpetual Traffic. And when I took it over, it was sort of in in shambles a little bit. There was a ton of like negative reviews. The show wasn't really growing. And we came in, and within 3 months, we doubled their downloads. Within another 3 months, so about 6 months, we had 4x their downloads, and we were doing over 1 million downloads a year. And what was interesting is I had a call with the owner of the company that was putting on the show, and we had just had like one of our biggest years, and he was like, "We're going to shut down the show." And I was baffled, because it was like, according to all these external metrics, top 0.5% podcast in the world, it regularly showed up on the Apple podcast charts for the top marketing show. I mean, like, you go through every single podcast metric that you can think of, and this show is winning. And they wanted to shut it down, and I was nervous, because that was like part of my business, and then B, I was like, well, how do we prevent, how did this even happen, right? Where you have all of this quote unquote success, but it doesn't actually line up to, it doesn't actually translate into business. And so that was sort of the impetus for me to go, okay, yes, downloads are great. Yes, rankings are great. Getting on the charts are great. But if it's not actually contributing to business, if it's not contributing to actual revenue, if we can't see how the show is generating a real ROI, then inevitably at some point, someone is going to look up and go, why are we doing this? And if you haven't hit that point yet, I mean, it can happen if it's not done sort of in the right way. And so since then, I've been trying to figure out, okay, well, how do we fix that? And thus began my search. And so we have worked with a number of different shows in a lot of different industries. And some of you guys know Dustin Riekman. He hosts the 7-Figure Leap show. And we are just, what's interesting is I look at this show, and the show really has only done probably about a little less than 5,000 downloads since its inception, or probably approaching episode 75, 100, something like that. And the point I bring to that is that his show also, he was able to bring in off of that show. We just are interviewing Justin Welsh, is about to release next week, who I think has something like, 3 or 4 million followers across all of his platforms. A few weeks ago, we had the founder of Kit on the show. A few weeks before that, we had Ryan Dice, the founder of Digital Marketer, on the show. And the reason I bring this up is that, yes, the podcast is obviously doing what he's doing, but the opportunities that have come to Dustin from the connections that he's made on those episodes has been huge. He's gone on and spoken to Kit, we used to be ConvertKit. He's gone and spoken to their community and their group. He spoke to the certification team for digital marketer. And so what a lot of people think is that people come onto the show, or excuse me, people listen to the show, they go to the link, and then they buy the services. And of course that can happen, but early on, it's much more likely that the business and the revenue is going to be generated from the relationships and the connections that develop on the show. And so in a little bit, we're going to talk about like how do we actually do that? And how do we do it in a way that's not slimy, to actually create these, what I would call like dream 100, maybe even dream 10 sort of connections and relationships, so that now you're in the room with people who can really move the needle for your business. Another example is, one from our cybersecurity. We have a show called the Industrial Cybersecurity Insider, and it's ran by a industrial services company, and the show is one of the most boring shows I have ever produced, and it is so technical, and it is so about the industry. But the nice thing is that it has very quickly become the sort of authority in the space. I was just reading a press release where one of the big companies in the industry came on the show and sort of was talking about it. And what was really interesting is talking to the executives who host the show. Their sales cycle used to be like a 2-year sales cycle. They're signing 6-7 figure contracts to come and sort of rehaul these massive factories. And so it took a lot of time to get their foot in the door, to create some awareness, to obviously develop that trust, and then to get them excited enough to actually sign on and realize that these are the people that can be the provider for them. And after we started the show, it's probably about episode 15. They got a call from somebody, I believe it was in like Germany, somewhere in Europe, reached out to them and said, hey, we're putting together this project. We have this project. We were listening to your show. Can you submit an RFP for this project? And it was like a 7-figure, project. And they were baffled. They started, they reached out to the producers and some of the people that, that liaisons that help us with the show. And they're like, what's going on? What's happening? We don't understand what's happening. And it's, for me, on the other side, I'm sort of chuckling because I'm like, I know exactly what's happening. They binged the show. They realized that you guys had, what they needed. And so they reached out and asked for the business. And that had never happened to them previous to them putting out content. All of that had to be done through sales calls. All that had to be done sort of, quote unquote, belly to belly. But now they had this library of content that was extremely valuable to the specific niche. And so they were able to compress that sales time. I don't know what the numbers are, but to go from 2 years and to have a deal signed in 2 weeks was something that kind of blew their mind. They're a little, they're from a previous generation of business where everything was done sort of, like I said, belly to belly. And so leveraging media in this way really didn't click for them until that moment. And so I say that because a lot of people think that they've got to have a sexy show, or they've got to be, sort of this mass appeal to be successful. And I think it's actually the opposite. What we found, we have another show. It's a biotech podcast that we helped produce. And similarly, they were a service provider, they're a marketing agency, and in about, let's say by the end of the year, about 6 months to the end of the year, they had the major conferences in the industry reaching out to them saying like, hey, we'd love you to come speak. Hey, we saw, you have a podcast. Do you want to come in and host an episode at the event? And it was really funny because hearing them and talking to them after they went to this event, they felt like this is where I got the industry celebrity thing, from, because it was weird for them where people were running up to them, asking to take pictures with them, and, asking to, get on, have meetings, have calls with them, simply because they had listened to the show. And it was funny because the host was like, these people feel like they know me, and I've never met them before. But that's sort of what happens when someone consumes enough of your content, is that there's a relationship that's built. And obviously in business, so much of it is built on relationships. And again, that used to be, you used to have to be there in order to develop that. But now with content and with the right forms of media, that sort of relationship can be cultivated, outside of it. So the old model, I remember when I got into podcasts, there was sort of a model that you did to get successful. It was like, okay, let's launch the show. Let's get a bunch of reviews on Apple. Let's hit the top charts. And then if we could hit the top charts, people will find us, and then that'll make the show successful. And for a while that worked. And even today, that system is sort of possible where you can kind of hack the launch, and get into the top charts. The challenge is that unlike on Amazon, a lot of people, they see that on Amazon and they think, oh, I'm a bestseller and Amazon bestseller, and that's all cool. And of course it creates a great title, but there's also some revenue that comes on directly from people having to buy the books. That isn't necessarily the case with the podcast. And so early on in my sort of career doing this, we would do that, and we would launch them, we would get in the charts, and we would be waiting to see how excited they were. And of course the vanity part felt good for a little while. But again, inevitably they looked up and they go, well, this isn't actually, nothing. What is it working? Is anything coming from it? Yes, downloads look good, likes look good, views look good. They feel good in the moment, but podcasts, after a while, you'll notice they take a lot of time. They can take time or money, and it's an investment, regardless of whether you're investing time or money. And so my mission has been, how do we guarantee, how do we sustain and make the ROI predictable in a way that I just think is not there. And so our way has really been about quality over quantity, both from a content perspective and then also from a listener perspective. Because I forget who wrote the sort of the famous blog, 1,000 True Fans. And I think about that part a lot, because of the thesis of that blog was that you could create $1 million business off of 1,000 true fans. And what I've sort of come to believe is that 1,000 engaged, pick whatever number, 100, 500, 1,000. If a smaller group of engaged, dedicated listeners is way more powerful for your business, way more valuable for your business than having 10,000 or 15,000 or even 100,000 passively engaged people, or having a large group of people who aren't in your ideal, who you can't serve. That was a big problem that we realized with the perpetual traffic show, was that yes, we were doing 1 million downloads a year, but the way the company that was putting on the show couldn't serve most of those people. They actually, they served a very small selection of businesses that could afford their services and that were at the right stage in their business. And so having a mass audience was, like, again, it felt good, but we realized that if we could actually get this in front of the right people, it would be more beneficial for their business. And so for us, it's really about targeted distribution and marketing, not just sort of mass appeal. I think about train tracks, and I mentioned this a little bit when I was talking about the trip to Vegas. But a lot of people they build their podcasts like two separate train tracks that are running parallel to each other. And the problem with that is that those train tracks often never overlap. And so you could have a podcast that you're investing hours and dollars into every single week that never actually translates into the business. At least it does. It's not automatic, right? And so what we like to do is we like to create some more of a waterfall method, where or a flywheel sort of concept, where the time and the energy and the investment that you put into the show actually translates to the business, right? And so that's what these next few steps are really gearing us towards. I mentioned this, it's not about making a show for everyone. It's really about creating a show for a specific someone. I was talking to somebody today who's going to launch a show, and he was saying how, in his space, there's a lot of people who are creating, shows that are in his sort of niche. And there's a lot of shows out there that are already created. And my advice, or my sort of, what I was telling him, is that yes, there are a lot of shows out there. There are a lot of podcasts, just like there's a lot of books, just like there's a lot of TV shows, just like there's a lot of movies. But what you'll find is that, yes, there are a lot of books, but when I scroll through my Kindle and I'm trying to find a new read, it seems like there's nothing there. Same thing when I scroll through Netflix, it's like there's nothing on that's for me, or at least that I feel is for me. And so when we're creating shows, instead of trying to create it for a mass appeal, again, we're trying to make it for that specific somebody, because if we are creating it for that specific somebody, we know the challenges that they're going through. We know the problems that they're going through. We know the things that are keeping them up at night. We know the things that are getting them up early. We know what they are frustrated with. And if we can speak to those things, then it doesn't really matter who we are, how big of an audience we have, or even how long they've been connected to us. If they know that we understand their problems and their challenges, and we can show them that we can present the solution or the answers to those, they're going to listen, or at least going to give us a chance. And so that's really what it is like, how do we make a show that is for somebody, not just everybody? And let's talk about how to do it. So the first part of what we call our profitable podcast framework, and the foundation of it is dialing down the premise. And this is, what's the show for, and excuse me, who's the show for, and why do they care? Our biggest sort of focus in launching a show is who is the target audience. And if you go through our sort of our internal systems, we have a very detailed sort of paragraph on who the listener is, from their age to their demographics to their psychographics to their interests. And again, not only who are they, like what are they, whether they are a business owner, female, male, industry, things like that, but also at what stage are they in? Because someone, you could create a general health podcast, which is about, living healthier. That's great. But if you were to create a podcast for someone who is, trying to lose weight, that's a different journey than someone who's trying to gain weight or trying to build muscle. And that's a different journey from somebody who's trying to lower their stress. And so if we just create a general show, we're going to miss out on a lot of those. And so again, knowing who it's for is really, really key. The next part of that, though, is okay, why do they care, and who are you? And so the positioning part of it is a little bit different in the sense of, are they thinking about you in their head? One of my mentors, Jeff Hoffman, he wrote the book called Scale. He talks about branding in the sense, and positioning in the sense of like a parking spot. And he says that in a parking lot, even if it's a crowded parking lot, assuming there's enough spaces, right? Like, let's take that out of the scenario. But assuming there's enough spaces, everybody has a space. It's just about finding the right space. And of course, some might be close to the restaurant or farther away, but everybody has a space. And just because someone is parked in the space next to you doesn't mean that you can't be parked in this space. And similarly, having a show is not just about having it about health, or even about losing weight, but okay, if it's losing weight for moms, or losing weight for dads, or losing weight for whoever, right? It's what position are you occupying in their mind? And this usually comes from a few things. The first is your experience. We really lean into that. And this is understanding the types of clients that you've served and the industries that you serve. That creates a really unique skill set, right? That you have, and a really unique expertise, which is not only who have you worked with and what industries have you worked in, but what have you done for them? Those nuances, those experiences, those insights are something that you've probably developed over years. And when you go through and catalog them, you'll realize that what you think is sort of common knowledge is so far from common knowledge, right? And the expertise that you have is pretty unique in the sense that most people haven't gone through and done what you've gone through. Obviously, Candy in the range of accounting and finance, and Don in the ability to work with different types of people in mental health and all those sorts of things. Like what have you done? What sort of expertise do you have? And then the third thing that we really lean into is what I call it, to keep it consistent with the ease, is the enthusiasm, or essentially what's the unique quirkiness that you have. A lot of people, they come on, and having a podcast is sort of a first experience for them, because it's sort of their first time that they're in like having like a public persona. And what we encourage our people to, our hosts to do, is to lean into those personalities. When I think about the Perpetual Traffic show, there was it was two hosts. They had a host and a co-host, and one of them was a little more, by the book. He was a little more, structured, and the other person was a little bit more, off the rails. He was kind of iconoclastic, and having those two personalities really did well, because some people fed off and I related with this person that is a little, of a rabble rouser, and they, are a little more aligned with that person. And also these other people who were a little more, by the book and a little more structured or rigid, they identified with other hosts. The kind of classic example of that is the sports commentator and the color commentator, right? There's the commentator, which is the play-by-play person who's, sort of paying all the plays, you know, keeping everybody up to date on what's going on with the game. And then you have the color person who adds context, who adds personality, who adds, you know, maybe some entertainment or whatever it is. And so leaning into that part of it and understanding who you are, and we don't tell our hosts to be caricatures of who they are. It needs to be authentic. It needs to be with integrity. But to create a character actually allows people to identify with you more. If you think about a lot of the, you know, famous shows, I grew up like with the Power Rangers. You know, I think about like, you know, Cheers is another famous one, the Brady Bunch, like all of these ones. Friends is another classic example. Everybody sort of identified with someone different there. Some identified with Ross, some identified with Rachel, but because they were all there, it gave people the opportunity to relate to them. And so just being very vanilla or being sort of blasé can sort of group you in with everybody else, where if you are bombastic or you are funny or you are sarcastic or you are nerdy or whatever it is, really leaning into that can help to, again, further position you in the parking space that is there. The next is the platform. And so once we know who we're talking to and we know who we are and why they're listening, the third part is the platform and engineering some sort of fashion so that, okay, if people listen, is there a way for them to get into your business? Is there some sort of way for them to be able to follow up, get a lead magnet, get into your email list, book a call, whatever it is? I think that this is a big area where people just put out content and they have no way for people to raise their hand. They have no way for people to further engage with them. And this is a critical mistake, because even if you have only 100 people listening, if you can get 5, 10 to 15, 20 of them to come in and work with you, well, that might make it all the worth it, right? And so they might just be looking for the opportunity. When I think about platform, the name comes from, back in the day when people would, they'd stand up and, on a platform, and they would basically just like yell out to people and, gather around here sort of thing. And what's interesting is that you start to gather people, right? And once you do that, people start to gather and you can create a community, right? The difference between sort of a platform and a community is that the community can interact with each other. And when you can do that, now you've got a marketing engine. Now you've got people that are out there marketing and advertising for you, but it all comes from sort of a structured integration, from creating a place for those people to connect, creating an opportunity for those people to connect, whether it's in a circle community, whether that is on a live, networking call or whatever it is, but creating an opportunity for people to engage back with you is a huge piece of making this whole engine and system go. Okay, I've been talking for a little bit. I want to just check in and see if there's any questions, things that I could clarify on this first part, which is, a lot of you guys have already heard, but it wouldn't be right to not talk about it. Good to go? All right, so let's get into the nitty-gritty. Here's some of the stuff that's end of presentation. That's not the end of presentation. We're just getting to the good stuff. Okay, we'll have an audible here. So the first part is of actually making this happen is what I call our pipeline builder playbook. Let's do this. Let's do this. So I found this fun quote from Jill Conrath, who wrote Cold Calling Revisited. And I mentioned that my background before media was in cold calling, or not cold calling, but that's essentially what it felt like, as I was, I would make 32 phone calls a day to try and sell knives and get into without being insulting, middle-aged women's houses and kitchens to try and upgrade their kitchen stuff. And so it was really a numbers game. It was like, can we make more calls? We might get more business. But what I realized though is that yes, you can make a lot of calls, but it's really, if you can get in touch with the right people, that's going to make all the difference. And so that's really where we've sort of changed this and and modified it to make sure that we're not just talking to everybody, that we're talking to the right people. So I would imagine that each of you have an idea of who your dream prospects are, right? People that are ideal for you, that don't have the issues about time or money or whatever, that if you could get in front of them, you could highlight your value to them, that they're going to be the perfect customer for you. That's who really, I think about if you could have a calendar filled with those people. Like, what does your business look like? What does your life look like? How do things change if all of a sudden we're not searching for people to sell to? And so my thoughts and my suggestion to you is, don't just interview anybody. That was something that I did early on in our sort of process with this. Was I would just try and interview anybody. I was like, I've got a show, come on the show, we'll interview you. And I would try and, figure out how to make business on the, out of that. It was great. It was fun, great conversations, great connections. But what I realized is that, again, I ended up spinning my wheels. I had all of these people to sort of sift through, and it was only a small percentage that ended up turning into clients. And so if I said, what if I just focused on those people and made all of my effort and energy and attention just focused on those? And so that's sort of what we developed, is how do we interview the right people, and then how do we put them into what we call our pipeline builder. So here's how it works. Let's just bring up the whole process. So there's really 3 steps here. First is what we call the multimodal invite process. And once we've got our ideal prospects, put them on a list, whatever it is that you use, whether it's, an AI, a search. There's a lot of ways to sort of get, get these people sort of their information. We like to do 2 things. The first we like to do is we like to reach out to them on LinkedIn. LinkedIn is a great place. And what I love about LinkedIn is that there are a lot of tools and a lot of ways to be able to get their email address. So a lot of people, if you are connected with someone on LinkedIn and you click their little contact info button on top of their profile, a lot of times you will be able to just find their email right there. And so what's great is we send a connection, we send an invite, and then we also follow up with an email. This does 2 things. The first is that you have obviously a double chance of being able to get them to see it. But I also really like reaching out on LinkedIn because they can do their own research. They can they can start to go down the funnel themselves. And I'm not here to, I'm not a LinkedIn sort of business development person, but there are a lot of people out there that talk about how to format your profile and how to, make sure that your description is great. But if you do that, or even if you just have a really, just an optimized profile that talks about your business, that sales process, that trust process can start to build right from the very beginning. So the first part is reaching out. Simple. We have scripts and playbooks to help you with that. But the invite is huge. The second part is where the juice actually begins, right? The magic actually begins. Whoa, that's not what I wanted to do. And that's the interview funnel. So what we found is that just bringing people on and interviewing them was great, was fantastic, and it created some great relationships and great connections, but that's where it stopped. It didn't actually facilitate any, business, and even, it didn't facilitate a lot of sales calls and even less business. And so we said, how do we structure and how do we engineer a system that actually facilitates these on a sustainable and sort of regular basis? And so that's how we created the interview funnel. And so I mentioned the invite. Invite is pretty simple. It's like 2 or 3 sentences. I'll be honest, not very personalized. What it does is it just gives a very good insight into the show and why that we're reaching out to them. So you gotta, want to make that make sense. Once they agree to come on the show, what we have all of our guests go through is what we call, a pre-call connections. Pretty standard in for a lot of podcasts. The difference is, though, is that at this point, we're really starting to fact find. We're really starting to get information on how we might be able to serve this business. We're looking for the obstacles, the challenges that they're in. We're not selling yet, but we're really looking for what are they going through, and are we and can we be in a position to serve them? So that way, once we get to the interview, we're already loaded up and we already know a lot about them. And again, not a lot of selling at this point yet, but what you can do is you can ask great questions and you can start to highlight and position some of your authority, some of your expertise, some of the experience, because the goal is the real magic happens right after the interview, and what we call the post-recording transition. And usually a lot of guests will spend a few minutes chit-chatting after the call, after the recording ends. They'll let the files upload, all those sort of things, act like a human. But this is really the key moment where you can start to deliver value. And the way that we found is the best way is our line of, I don't know if it would help, but I have blank. So I don't know if it would help, but I have this training that I can send you, or I don't know if it would help, but we do these certain calls that might help you, or I don't know if it would help, but we have this thing of value that you would be perfect for, that since we've learned over the last half hour, 45 minutes of the interview or the conversation, we know that you are right for this. And here's the solution to that. And so again, it can be a call, it can be a video series or training, it can be an email opt-in, a drip sequence, whatever is going to be the next step of that pipeline, right? Or the next step in the pipeline so that they can move forward to it. And this is a really low pressure opportunity to start to sell. And if you do it right, and if you ask the right questions, inevitably the guest gets to a point where they go, so tell me what you do. Like, we've been talking about me this whole time. Tell me what you do. And that's when you know you're in. And so then that's when we do what we call the value-filled follow-up, which is could be any or all of the combination of what I mentioned: the drip sequence, the consulting call, the strategy call, the coaching call. But what we do is now at this point, they've raised their hand and they are ready to, they're willing to sort of go down that pipeline sequence. We've seen this work really well with, we worked with a SaaS company, and they would do a quick demo after the recording. And that would be a great way to sort of show and highlight their product. They booked a sales call following up with that, and they were able to, move people down the pipeline that way. And what's great about this is at this point, if you do it right, it can be done the wrong way. I've seen people do what I call the timeshare sort of strategy, which is you get in there and from the very beginning, they are like hard selling you. And the problem with that is it feels icky. It sort of feels gross, and people can like smell and sense that. On the flip side, our side is really about providing and giving as much value in advance before ever asking for anything. And so at this point, we've done a great interview. We've built a lot of connection. We've even talked about how, we're going to send them assets and media and all that sort of stuff. We've given a lot. It's the law of reciprocity starts to open the door for you to sort of make those asks in a way that they are going to be receptive to. And so having that post-recording value is huge. And a lot of you guys already have them. Maybe it is just packaging something up. But having something to get them onto the next part is critical, because they are a hot lead or a warm lead at that point. At least the relationship is warmed up, and you can sort of capitalize on the relationship that you've built over the recording. Okay, questions on the pipeline funnel there? Cool. Okay. A lot of people are like, well, and if they're in this position, that's great. Their pipeline's already full. They've got already, a long list of sales calls. Fantastic, amazing. But not everybody wants to be on sales calls all day. I know for me, that's, if I want to make sure I'm on the right sales calls. I don't just want to be on calls to be on calls. And so this next playbook is like, okay, if we already have some of that, our sales process is already established, how do we grow outside of it, right? This is sort of the growth method and the avenue for growing the show. So when I think about it, I said, I asked the AI to create a graphic of a fish shooting in a barrel, because I think about that's really what we're trying to do, is how do we become the big fish in a small pond? I mentioned the biotech hosts. They would walk around conferences and literally people would run up to them and ask them to take pictures. And how do we get somebody in our industry? I was talking to another person today where for them, it's not really an industry, it's their local community, right? They started, after the podcast, people were coming up to them and, when they were out at dinner or when they were out, another guy was out at a bar and such, and they were not necessarily focusing on a specific niche or industry, but it was a community. And so whatever that pond is, whatever that barrel is really like getting clear on it. The different ponds that I can think about are mastermind groups, organizations like EO or YPO or chambers of commerce. All of these are quote unquote barrels that if you can become the celebrity within that networking group or within that chamber of commerce or within that city, well, what could that do to your business if people all of a sudden knew what you knew the value that provided, knew the expertise that you had, knew the skill set and the solutions that you offer? That's another opportunity, and takes a little bit of a different strategy in sort of getting those in front of them. So that's why we say identify your barrel, right? Figure out who you want to be, who you want to listen to. The second part is knowing what we call your lures, just to keep your, the fishing sort of example. I know we said shooting fish in a barrel, but this is something that's often overmissed, and thinking about the content and the episodes and the type of content is actually the thing that draws people in. And so if we can create episode topics, or we have certain guests that those people are interested in, that's going to resonate with a certain type of people. If we have a certain type of content, in the sense of maybe it's a short form video or maybe it's a newsletter, those are things that can also reach different types of people. We found that some people read podcasts. It's interesting, especially, in more professional niches and people that are, busy and have lots of things going on. They don't always have the time to watch a full episode, but they'll read the recap, or they'll read the summary, or they'll read an article that's broken down for it. We find also that a lot of the awareness and a lot of the audience that's built from a podcast, they are not always podcast listeners, but they're short. They watch the shorts, they watch the clips. And so really identifying how this barrel, how they're going to consume it, and all the different ways we can package it is a big part of this process. So once we know what those people are interested in, and we know the types of content that they're going to be consuming, well, now we can get really targeted with our distribution, right? And we think about targeted distribution over mass promotion. What's mass promotion? Mass promotion looks like posting on to Instagram and putting a couple of hashtags on there and hoping it goes viral. Mass promotion is the YouTube basics, where you put a description, you put some keywords on there, and you sort of put it up there and hope that it gets seen by people. When we talk about targeted distribution, we talk about taking a specific episode, taking a certain topic, even a piece of content, and getting that directly to the individual. And that could be via direct message, that could be via text. We've had people do. It also comes via email. And so when it comes to these organizations like an EO or a YPO or chambers of commerce, all of these people have email lists, and they have ways to be able to connect with their members. And oftentimes these organizations are not they're not in the business of creating content. They're not in the business of creating media. And so if you can provide enrichment to their organization, if you can provide value to their members, well, then all of a sudden you become an asset to them. You become something that's valuable to them. And all it takes often is, hey, I have this episode that I think would be really great for blank. I just wanted to send it to you. Maybe you can put it in the next one, or there are forums, communities, Facebook groups, whatever it is, right? Just really making sure that we put the episodes in front of people is going to be the key to them listening, to them actually consuming it, because there's so much noise out there. There's so much content that people can be watching, that if we're not being selective about who we are getting it in front of, it's often not going to do it. And so as that part of it says the last part of it is to iterate and adjust, and be willing to make changes, both from the content and both in the style in which we are doing it, and also the topics. Both of those are sort of this moving target. You really have two targets that you're trying to hit. What feels good for you and what feels good for the audience. And once you find both of those, that's really when the magic, has has worked. So 2 playbooks. One is a little bit more direct. One is really about developing relationships, developing network, developing connections with people that can be profitable partners, that can drive business for you. The other one is about getting, using and leveraging that awareness to reach those people. Both, when put together, can be a really powerful combination. Okay, I know Candy had to head out. Seems like Don too. Sammy, I wanted to take a quick moment there. That was most of the material. A lot of the rest of it sort of was going to be saved for Q&A. Is there anything worth double tapping on, or feel free to take over the train there?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, apologize. I've got a bit of a cold, but I'm trying to talk through my nose as best I can. The question I have that you mentioned, I get, what's the distinction, between using this as a door opener versus a platform? Because I get the door opener part. I mean, that's for sure. It's like a way to get access to and develop a relationship with maybe one of your, target ICPs or something like that, or some influencer within the, the same circle or tribe that you target. Because obviously they've got influence, and others are going to that follow them are going to then, hopefully check out the content, whatever, and then they discover me, the host. But what I guess I'm struggling with is that really that you do have to choose between that tack versus the platform tack, which is the platform. By that I mean that
No.
where you're just coming up with a premise, and that's what the show is about. That's what you drill into on every episode, and then and gathering different interesting perspectives from different people that have experience and opinions and knowledge and things to share, right? That other people that have that same interest want to hear. I don't know. I'm a little I'm not sure, or is it both? I don't. I'm not. I'm just.
I'd say it's yes and. The way that I presented the pipeline first is because that is the one that is usually quicker to result, and usually the one that you have sort of the most direct control over, because you have the person in front of you, and so that relate you have a little more control that way. If control, we can use that word. The platform is. The reason I put it second is because it is a little slower to take, and it does take some time for that sort of process to happen. Because what happens is, first is there's some awareness, right? Even if you're new on the scene, they go, "Oh, that's interesting. That I see this guy," and they go on with their lives. And then the second time you pop up again, and they're like, "Oh, I see he's talking about this." So now you sort of solidify yourself. The first is just general awareness, but there's that old adage, sales adage, of people need to see something like 7 to 10 times. I think Google said it's now something with like something between 16 placements and like 2 hours of like,
yeah.
And so So the second stage of that is they start to solidify the positioning, but just because you're positioned there doesn't mean that trust has been built yet. And so that's why it sort of takes a little bit of time for them to go from awareness to positioning to trust, and then I guess even at the third point, you sort of need the impetus to take the next step, right? They need to feel enough pain, they need to feel enough frustration or whatever it is to be willing to book a call, download the lead magnet, submit a contact form or whatever.
Yeah. So that's more of the Daniel Priestley approach to key person of influence, the whole DENT thing. Are you familiar with that?
I've heard of him. Yes, I haven't studied his work much, but yeah, I've heard of him.
He's amazing, man. He's really, I love his stuff. He's just so good.
Actually, I think I've read he's put out a couple of books, so I think I've read a couple of them. But it sort of allows you to be top of mind with those people, and so that's why I say that it's
right.
You can do them in conjunction with each other if you can.
Okay, I see. Yeah, I see.
Then you can do both, right?
Right.
And it takes a little bit more. What's the word I'm looking for? Finesse is not the right word, but if you are trying to develop a relationship and create valuable content, that's sort of two objectives in the interview that you need to hit, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and I just find it a little bit. I guess I'm having trouble with the idea that, let's say there's somebody that I think would make a great client. I invite them on the show because I've had this done to me many times. This is like a new. This is almost like, you know, the new sales thing, right? I mean, it's like so many people invite me on their podcast. And then do a little pre-interview, and then we do it, and then and then the pitch, comes on or whatever. And I never see these podcasts. They never send me a link. They don't even produce them. Okay, so really,
And that's the timeshare sort of effect. And I,
it
I
is, it is. It's so funny because it's kind of like it's kind of the new thing. It's like, oh, you want me to be on your podcast? So anyway, it's like so.
well, you bring
Anyway,
up a good point because there's a wrong way to do it. And so
uh-huh.
you'll notice here though that like in our sort of process, I'm very mindful, and we tell our guests that are running this, or our hosts that are running this playbook, to really like, if done the right way, you don't have to be salesy. If done the right way and they're the right person, by
No,
asking the
no,
right sort
I'm
of
with you.
questions.
I'm not. Yeah, I get that.
Yeah.
I'm not gonna be salesy. It's not my thing. So I'm not worried about that. But what I having trouble reconciling is that when that I invite them on. So let's say that there's a premise of my podcast that is related to what I do, right? What I sell. My service, my solution. So I'm maybe. Why am I inviting them on? It's like, well, tell me what you do in this regard, or how do you run this, or do I say, let's say, let me just give you an example. Let's say it's a,
Remind me what you do. This. Tell me what is the services you provide?
well, I've spent the last 15 years focusing on one thing, which is the first 60 seconds of from the time a new inbound form lead, arrives. So I created a product that is focused on those first 60 seconds. So the premise being that the likelihood of converting a lead drops 4 times in 60 seconds, drops 8 times in 5 minutes. So what I did is I developed an application so that when someone fills out a form, then as soon as they hit submit, unbeknownst to them, it rings the phone, of the sales rep, let's say, or
Yes.
team, whatever.
Yeah.
And say,
I
hey,
remember.
you
I
have a
remember.
lead. Yeah, boom, press one, boom, it calls, and magic happens. They're like, oh my God, it's incredible.
I remember.
It's so simple, but it's so powerful because no one calls in 60 seconds. Now, okay, so that was, and then a few years ago, as you've heard, AI came along. And so now I can take, I've evolved the first 60 seconds. So now I'm focused on the first 5 minutes. So what's the first 5 minutes? Well, the same thing. It's still I can you can use my platform to call a live rep or an AI rep, voice, agent, or both, so you might call a live rep, no one's available. Okay, then the backup is your AI agent to take the call for you or go call the lead for you. Now, while we have this, obviously we have the ability now to use the same voice agent to take inbound direct calls because people get leads either by form or by phone, right? Or sometimes chat, whatever. But for the most part, their budget is spent on inbound phone. This is the B2C companies like,
Mhm.
so most of their money is spent on generating inbound phone calls or inbound forms or a combination. And so now we can service both of those things and take control of the first 5 minutes, which is making sure 100% containment of every opportunity, whether it be by form or by phone. So there's obviously every call is answered, and then convert that into an appointment or next step and qualify it or whatever the process is for that particular type of business, and then make sure that every and then if it's existing customers calling, because that happens too, obviously customer service, handle that as well, because that's good for business. And so it's really, it's just that specific um, part of the business that because it's where the biggest lever, the highest, the most leverage is. Hence the name Leverly. It's where all the leverage is. I mean, because
Yeah.
if you can capture that and you can perfect it and then constantly improve it, and you also obviously I'm integrating in with the CRMs or the EMRs or whatever. So I'm I know what the next step is. I know what the next task is. I can retrieve data. I can do all that. So I can accomplish a lot, and then I can use
Do you
call.
consider, is it more in the do your clients look at that as more of a sales function, a marketing function, an operations function?
It's all three, really. It's because I can tell them what their CAC is, but because I know the source of every lead, I know what it cost, right? For the I can track it through all the way to revenue. And I'm not trying to be a CRM. I'm very tight on my boundaries. I'm not trying to take over anything outside of my tight little area. But I am the first point of entry, which is, oh, where did this call come from? Where did this form? How did this traffic come from on the form? So I can use all those sources to identify the cost of that call, and then whether it converted into first an appointment, and then obviously, or to whatever the next step in the sales funnel is, and then ultimately through revenue report back, and then constantly show them what the cost per acquisition is on every lead. And they can make intelligent decisions about you know it's where they should spend their money, what their lowest cost is, and all that sort of simple stuff. It's just constantly improve, like every business wants to do. And then they can listen to their reps, and they can say, okay, this rep scored really low, talked too much, not empathetic, didn't ask questions, didn't ask for the call, the order, whatever. So so they report back, hey, you got an issue over here, you got to do some coaching. So there's a lot going on in that first 5 minutes, a lot.
Yeah.
And
Well,
so
well,
I'm trying to capture that and serve it up to them in a way that they can. Not only do I optimize it, but I'm constantly giving them what they need to keep on improving it.
yeah.
Right.
I put a pretty gross picture up here in terms of what how you can, how you might structure this. So the way that I would think about it is you would have a show that is almost about general business stuff, right?
Uh-huh.
It's a very, whether it's a sales, at least the show, the premise of the show is sales or marketing or operation or all of the above. Just it could be a general,
Uh-huh.
a cool name, but that talks everything business. And then within that, you come in and you occupy this slice of that. You're the expert in, like you said, the first 5 minutes. But the
Yeah.
guests that you're going to bring on, they're experts in whatever they're experts in.
Okay.
And
So
so,
they've come up with some way of generating leads, because I'm not generating the lead, right?
yes,
So I
yeah,
could talk to them about that. How do you get all these leads? Yeah, that's cool. Yeah.
yeah. So you position the premise of the show is sort of more broad. You come
Right.
in and you occupy this slice of expertise, but
Right.
to the listeners, the guests are providing it. You like you said, you don't go in and generate the leads, so they can come in and talk about that, or you
Yeah,
might
and
be
I'm not doing operations. I'm not like the ones who are, optimizing,
exactly.
their reps and whatever the type, because I have too many niches, but I've gotten it down to about four, four out of 4 million. So it's because it's education and pest control and insurance and health clinics.
Yeah. So
I'm,
so what
I'm,
I might recommend is,
and I know everybody's just pick one, damn it.
well, I think that you've niched. I mean, I'm not going to tell you how to. I think you've found like a niche, whether that is,
Yeah.
like they
Mhm.
said, in one category is. I think you serve a particular type of business in a specific type of way, and
It's still SMB and it's still B2C. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
in a specific, sort of. They are in a certain place in their business dealing with a certain thing, and so
Yeah.
I think if you, and I would, we can obviously work through this a little more, but finding a business sort of topic that lights you up, that you're excited about, that's sort of more general, and
Okay.
then creating the show around that, I think is going to be the way that you can appeal. You can create that platform for that way. It's a, you're kind of attracting this audience, but then you can also still occupy that space for on the show, and say, when we're doing this, or in the first 5 minutes, and you can kind of drop those things in
Yeah.
as
Yeah.
you're going in, where it's not all about you, but the listener knows that you're the first 5 minutes guy. The guest now knows that you're the first 5 minutes guy, but the conversation
Right. Is about the whole business and their particular, and then their unique you know, whatever they skill or knowledge or something experiment they've run or the success they've had that they can share with other people, right? You know,
Because every
yeah,
business and service, even if they're in different industries and have different products or services, there's something similar about
sure.
business. You know,
Yeah, I
like I
mean,
run a bakery, but I can learn
I
something.
mean, listen. I was thinking the other day that I think I've had meetings with at least 5,000 small businesses in my career. 5,000 at least. You know,
Mhm.
that's a lot. And so I kind of have a feel for it. You know what I mean? Like, because you're right, they're all pretty much the same. They
Yeah,
all
well,
think they all
and
think
what's
they're
great is that
different.
you can, well, yeah, they do, and the listener though, right? Because we're talking about the platform, the listener will be able to see in themselves and in their own business what, like, they'll be able to draw from the guest experience and
Yeah.
apply it to their own business. You know, one of my
Okay.
favorite podcasts when I was sort of getting into starting my first business was called Entrepreneurs on Fire. John Lee Dumas. I don't know if you're familiar with that one.
I
And
have, yeah, I have heard of it, and I think I have listened to it or watched it or something. Yeah, I remember.
he would just interview and like all different sorts of businesses, and I
Yeah.
think he was the first one to sort of kind of create this sort of pipeline funnel,
Uh-huh.
or this pipeline sort of playbook. But every business was different. But in listening to those, he was a great host in the sense that he could find the applicable insights and he could draw
Yeah,
out.
yeah. Try to find. Yeah, try to extract it from them. Yeah, cool. Yeah, I have the name of the podcast I've come up with. Just tell me what you think. Whether this plays, because you want something that could go various directions, right? As you evolve.
Right.
So, would this name work, or is it putting myself too much in a corner? The name I have is Pain Point.
I like it. It's broad enough. I think subtitles are the most underutilized thing in sort
Sure,
of
sure,
podcast
sure.
branding.
Some
So
sort
it's
of
pain
tagline.
point. Yeah, exactly. Pain point, and then something a little bit more so that people know it's not about breaking their arm, or it's not about
Right. Yeah. 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 Yeah.
pain point, how businesses fight through the hardest times, or how business, whatever it is, right? Something that
Yeah. Because every business has a different pain point, right? It's every day that they're trying to address. Yeah.
right, right, right,
And or they're in business to address a pain point of their customer.
exactly.
So it works both ways.
That's
So
actually what I was thinking you were going to the first time. So yeah, what's nice about that is it's broad enough for you to have a general business conversation.
yeah. So I can say, because this is kind of my thing. It was like, Um, okay, so what pain point do you solve? Like, oh, we do this. Okay, you're amazing. Okay, good job. And then what about your pain point? What pain point do you have right now? So I kind of then put them on the couch, if you will, and say, tell me about,
Yeah,
what your troubles. And then they go, you know what, we just can't solve. We can't figure out how to, get our sales team to, to be consistent and follow the script. Again, I don't do that. Okay. Well, maybe somebody listening does that, and they can reach out to you. So to me, that's a cool premise for a show, which is I'm almost creating prospects for other people to sell to,
sure, sure. Yep,
which is I think is fine. I think that's a good thing. Yeah.
for sure. Yeah, if you're not going to be able to serve them, like
Yeah. I'm not going to. I'm not. I'm not going to try. And I'm not going to say, well, I know somebody I can refer you to, or we can get and do a referral thing, which is also another premise for podcasts, right? It becomes a referral engine.
for sure. I mean, perhaps even more than, and I think that this is something that, like, when I think about pipeline, for me, it's prospects and partners. Like, those are the two people that I want to
Uh-huh.
be able to invite on the show.
Okay. Right, I
Someone,
got you.
someone that can either be a client or that can introduce me to a client.
That's a great point. Because for me, for example, when you're talking about scaling, do you follow Dr. Benjamin Hardy and
Sure.
all that? Okay. So yeah, I've been in his cohorts for a couple years off and on. Anyway, so the leverage there of bringing partners on is huge, right?
Yeah,
So if I bring on somebody that's got 40,000 customers that can all use what I offer, that's a that's
exactly.
that makes a lot of sense. Hmm.
Exactly. And the platform becomes, because a lot of these you might be an outlier in the sense that a lot of the SaaS providers, or you might not consider yourself, but like in that in between where they're very product focused. Oftentimes they are not marketing focused, and definitely not media and content focused. And so for you to be able to provide a platform for them to come out and get that awareness, or even for them to have a place for you to sort of extract that value to get them to talk about it, and then now that can be clipped up, and now that can be put on LinkedIn, or like you can take all the bits and pieces out of it. It's a huge value to those people. And so like and a great start to the relationship, right? Those people, now you've provided some real value to them. So the ask of, hey, can you introduce me, or how can we, basically, how can I get in front of your customers, becomes a much easier ask.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. It sounds realistic. It sounds worthwhile. So okay. So tell me what you do.
You see how that works?
Hey, it's working. I just did what you said was going to happen. This is brilliant. Go ahead. Hey, Matt, as that remember that, I don't know, it's a very old commercial. Never forget. It's called it's for a dishwashing detergent, and the line was, "Mad, you're soaking in it," which is Anyway, it's a funny commercial. But yeah. So go ahead. Tell me what you do.
Sure. Since you asked, and I was only going to bring it up if anyone asked. Here's our, let's see how we do this. So we talked about this. What do we do? We launch shows and we manage shows. So everything from when we're creating it, the cover art, musical intro, help setting up a virtual recording studio for you. Or I think are you local? Were you in SoCal?
Yeah, I'm in San Diego. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So, we can come down and help set up the studio in person, or even since you're in SoCal, we can like set up live shoots, all that sort of stuff. So that way you just have the, conversation. We handle the rest. We do the editing, the show notes, promotions, graphics, all the clips, short, publish everywhere, all that stuff.
Got it.
Our guarantee is that you make the investment back within 90 days, or we keep producing your show until you do. So that way, we kind of try and put our money where our mouth is. We talked about these. Here's that Grow Everything, that biotech show, some other ones, perpetual traffic. For the full launch, it includes 12 episodes. It's $7,500. You can break that off into a couple of payments, but that includes, like I said, all of the strategy, the launch, all of the editing, the promotion, the distribution, Apple, Spotify, and all that stuff. And then a lot of people will continue having us do it afterwards, or we can set up the team or internal sort of VAs or whoever with all of the SOPs and processes to edit and continue the show on their own.
Okay, got it. Well, I don't have the budget right now, but I obviously ultimately don't want to deal with all that. All the things you're taking off the plate are, definitely things I want to have taken off my plate. So
yeah, well, when that time is right, or we have another thing that we do is sort of just the setup and the strategy, not necessarily the editing and stuff. And so if it makes sense to sort of dial in all of the branding and all of the all that, the positioning, the premising, and the platform, create all the workflows and SOPs, and even set up the studio, like we have an option for that. So
okay,
stuff and follow up, and when time right.
Go ahead and send me the info, and then, because I have clients that might be a better fit, right, for this sort of stuff.
Sure.
And because it's a cool idea, and especially when there's a tangible payback on it. That's
for sure.
And where does that money come from? Where does that? It's so 90 days. Where does that typically come from?
Well, ideally we'll work our pipeline builder, and so we just track, who's coming in through the show, who's turned into clients, who's that sort of stuff. And with guests and stuff, it's usually pretty easy to see. Guests came on episode 2, they signed on here. Here was how much it was worth. And usually at that point, most of the clients we serve, with one client, they can sort of make back their investment.
Yeah. Got it. No, yeah, at least, sure. That makes a lot of sense. I mean, and do you get the guests as well, or is that a different thing?
Yeah, we can reach out to them and book them.
Yeah.
Yeah, that part is actually a lot simpler. Getting people to come on the show is pretty simple. What we don't do yet is get our clients on other shows. That's a little bit more.
Yeah, that's a Dustin thing. I mean, I was in Dustin's. I still am. I'm still part of his thing. You know, what 7-figure leap? What the podcast accelerator?
Mm-hmm.
And that's where I learned about you. Is through there. Yeah.
Very cool. Very cool. Yeah. Yeah. Makes sense.
So I haven't really fleshed out, the Dustin's whole strategy. I think Dustin's amazing. And he's got a really cool community, nice people. I just haven't had the ability to focus on it and just,
Sure.
execute. Right? That's all you got to do, man.
A lot of reps. Yeah. You got to slam the hammer a lot on that.
Yeah.
And so I get that, and ours is I think I mentioned it. I find that it's easier to, I learned in high school it's much easier to get the pretty girls to come over to your own party than trying to get invited to the parties that they're at. And so that's why the podcast becomes a little bit easier of an invite.
Yeah, no, that's a great way to look at it. It makes a lot of sense. Yeah. I like it. Okay, very cool, man. Well, I'll look forward to seeing your stuff and maybe figuring out a way forward, at some point.
Cool. Well, it's great to reconnect, Sammy. We'll be in touch soon, man.
All right, sounds good. Okay.
Have a good night.
Bye.